My hands shook as I stared at the devastating letter from my husband's attorney. Derek had abandoned me with $485,000 in debt, fled to Monaco with his mistress Crystal, believing he'd left behind a helpless housewife with no resources, but what he didn't know was that I'd been secretly building a $12 million investment portfolio for 5 years. And when I discovered Crystal Rossi was actually a notorious romance scammer who'd been systematically draining wealthy men across 3 states, I realized I held the keys to destroying them both. The manila envelope sat innocuously on my kitchen counter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But the moment I tore it open, my carefully constructed world imploded. The letterhead read Coleman and Associates Legal Firm, and the words seemed to blur together as my vision tunneled. Dissolution of marriage, asset division, outstanding debts totaling $485,000. I was Haley Calder, and for 7 years I had played the perfect supportive wife. I baked cookies for Derek's business meetings, attended charity galas in designer dresses he selected, and nodded appreciatively when he explained complex financial strategies that I supposedly couldn't understand. What Derek Calder never knew, what I had deliberately hidden from him since our 2nd year of marriage, was that while he saw me as his beautiful dependent housewife, I had been quietly building a financial empire that dwarfed his modest consulting income. The irony was suffocating. Derek had always been obsessed with traditional gender roles, insisting that men should be the primary breadwinners, that women were naturally better suited for nurturing and support roles. I need to feel like I'm providing for my family, he'd said, early in our marriage when I suggested contributing more financially. It's important for a man's self-worth, so I had smiled, nodded and played along, all while my secret investment accounts grew from thousands to millions. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and my stomach dropped as I read, "Derek told me you'd be devastated. Don't worry, I'll take good care of him. See." Attached was a photo that made my blood run cold. My husband of 7 years lounging on what appeared to be a luxury yacht, his arm wrapped around a stunning blonde woman I'd never seen before. She was young, maybe 25 to my 34, with the kind of calculated beauty that came from expensive procedures and professional styling. The woman who had apparently been worth destroying our marriage. But it was the next message that truly sent my world spinning. P.S. Thanks for the head start on the debt payments. Monaco is expensive, but your husband's credit cards are handling it beautifully, Crystal. Even her name sounded fake, manufactured for maximum appeal. As I stared at her perfect smile in the photo, something clicked in my memory. That face, I'd seen it before, but where? I rushed to my home office, the one space in our house that Derek rarely entered, dismissing it as my craft room, where I supposedly managed our social calendar and pursued my little hobbies. If he had ever looked closely, he would have seen the dual monitor setup, the financial news feeds, the encrypted hard drives containing records of my carefully hidden fortune. My real work happened here, in this room he considered frivolous, while Derek built his modest consulting practice, earning around $150,000 annually, and feeling proud of his provider status. I had been making strategic investments, trading currencies, and building a portfolio that now exceeded $12 million. The monthly statements came to a P.O. box across town. The accounts were held under my maiden name, Haley Reese, using my grandmother's address in another state. I pulled up my secure browser and began searching. Crystal Rossi Monaco scam, yielded nothing. Crystal Rossi romance fraud, still nothing. But when I tried blonde romance scammer luxury lifestyle, the results made my blood freeze. There she was, in a local news article from Phoenix dated 8 months ago. Local businessman loses $300,000 to romance scammer. The photo showed the same woman, though she'd been brunette then, identified as Sabrina Coleman. Another article from Dallas, dated a year prior. Investment advisor falls victim to elaborate romance scheme, featuring what was clearly the same woman with different hair, and the name Janie Rossi. My hands flew across the keyboard as I dug deeper. Social media profiles, with different names but the same face. Court records showing restraining orders filed by previous victims. A pattern emerged with sickening clarity. Crystal, or whatever her real name was a professional. She targeted successful men, usually in finance or business, developed romantic relationships, gained access to their resources, and vanished when the money dried up. But she'd made a crucial mistake this time. She'd chosen my husband. The attorney's letter lay spread across my desk, detailing how Derek had systematically emptied our joint accounts, maxed out credit cards in both our names, and even taken a second mortgage on our house, the house that I had actually purchased with my hidden funds, but allowed him to believe he was paying for to preserve his ego. The total damage was staggering: $485,000 in debt that he'd accumulated in the final months of our marriage, all of it legally tied to my name as his spouse. According to the letter, Derek was claiming that I should be responsible for these debts as part of our shared marital obligations, while he conveniently started fresh in Monaco with his new girlfriend. I actually laughed at the absurdity. Derek thought he was leaving behind a financially helpless woman who would be crushed by debt and unable to fight back. He had no idea that while he'd been accumulating $485,000 in debt, I had been accumulating wealth that could buy and sell his entire business 20 times over. But more importantly, he had no idea that his precious Crystal was about to become the key to my revenge. I opened a new browser window and began researching everything I could find about romance scammers, their methods, their vulnerabilities. If Crystal thought she could manipulate my husband and disappear with his money that was technically half mine, she had severely underestimated her opposition. My phone rang, displaying Derek's number. For a moment, I considered answering, imagining his shock when I calmly informed him that not only was I not devastated by his abandonment, but I was actually relieved to be rid of him. Instead, I let it go to voicemail. His message was predictably self-serving. "Haley, I know this is hard to understand, but I've found real love. Crystal and I are meant to be together. I've left you enough in the joint account to cover essentials while you figure out your next steps. Try not to be bitter about this. It's better for both of us. Enough to cover essentials." I checked our joint account balance, $2,847. He'd left me less than $3,000, apparently believing this was generous while he jetted off to Monaco with his scammer girlfriend. As I sat in my hidden financial command center, surrounded by evidence of both his betrayal and my secret wealth, a plan began forming. Derek wanted to play games with debt and financial manipulation. Perfect. I had been playing financial games at a level he couldn't even comprehend. And Crystal Rossi, or whoever she really was about to discover that she'd picked the wrong Mark's wife to mess with. The hunt was about to begin. The next 48 hours became a masterclass in digital forensics, as I systematically unraveled the web of deception Derek and Crystal had woven. What I discovered was so much worse than simple adultery. It was a calculated financial assassination that had been planned for months. My first stop was our shared credit card accounts. Derek had always handled the statements, claiming he wanted to protect me from financial stress, but now I accessed every account online using passwords I'd memorized years ago when he'd carelessly left his laptop open. The transaction history read like a romance novel written by someone with expensive tastes and no conscience. February, $15,000 charged to exclusive Escapes travel agency for a business trip to Aspen that I now realized had been a romantic getaway. March, $8,500 at Cartier, for what the receipt described as tennis bracelet, white gold, diamond accents. I'd never received any jewelry from Cartier. April, $22,000 to Mediterranean yacht charters, and another $12,000 to Four Seasons Resort Monaco. But it was the pattern of cash advances that truly sickened me. Starting in January, Derek had been systematically taking maximum cash advances from every card we owned. $5,000 here, $10,000 there, always staying just below the limits that would trigger fraud alerts. The timing coincided perfectly with what I was learning about Crystal's previous relationships. I cross-referenced the dates with her social media presence, which I'd managed to track across multiple platforms despite her use of different names. In January, around the time the cash advances started, photos showed her dining at expensive restaurants in our city. By February, she was posting luxury shopping hauls with cryptic captions like "When someone appreciates your worth." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. March brought images of private jet travel and five-star resorts. The woman was documenting her scam in real time, and my husband had been funding it all. But the credit cards were just the beginning. I discovered that Derek had also taken out a personal loan for $75,000 using our house as collateral, the house that I had secretly purchased 5 years ago with my investment earnings, but allowed him to believe he was paying the mortgage on. The loan application, which I found in his email drafts, listed his income as $180,000 annually, a figure inflated by nearly $30,000. More disturbing was what I found when I accessed his business accounts. Derek ran a small financial consulting firm, Calder and Associates, which primarily managed retirement portfolios for middle-class clients. His fiduciary duty required him to act in their best interests, but the account records showed a different story. Over the past 6 months, he had been gradually liquidating portions of client portfolios, ostensibly for rebalancing purposes, but instead of reinvesting the funds, he'd been transferring them to personal accounts. The amounts were small enough to avoid immediate detection, a few thousand from one client, 5,000 from another, but when aggregated, the theft totaled nearly $200,000. This wasn't just marital betrayal, this was embezzlement. I screenshot everything, methodically building a digital paper trail, while my mind raced through the implications. Derek hadn't just destroyed our marriage, he'd potentially destroyed the retirement security of dozens of elderly clients who trusted him with their life savings. My phone buzzed with another message from Crystal, and this time, the mask of sweet innocence had completely dropped. "I know you're probably going through Derek's accounts right now. Smart girl. But here's what you need to understand. I have compromising photos and videos of your husband that could ruin what's left of his reputation. If you want to keep this quiet and avoid a messy public scandal, you'll pay the debts he left behind and disappear quietly. Consider it the cost of keeping your dignity intact." The audacity was breathtaking. She was attempting to blackmail me into paying for my own husband's betrayal. I immediately began researching Crystal's blackmail tactics with her previous victims. The Phoenix businessman's case file, which I accessed through public court records, revealed a familiar pattern. After draining his accounts, Crystal had threatened to release intimate photos unless he paid an additional $50,000 in discretion fees. The Dallas investment advisor had faced similar demands, but what Crystal didn't know, what neither she nor Derek had bothered to investigate, was exactly who they were trying to manipulate. I opened my secure trading platform and reviewed my portfolio. $12.3 million across diversified investments, tech stocks, real estate investment trusts, cryptocurrency, precious metals and offshore accounts. The past 5 years of careful accumulation while playing the role of dutiful housewife had created a financial fortress that dwarfed anything in Derek's world. The beauty of my hidden wealth wasn't just its size, it was its complete invisibility to both of them. Every account used my maiden name, every statement went to addresses they'd never seen, every transaction was processed through brokerages that had no connection to our shared financial institutions. While Derek had been planning his escape with a professional scammer, believing he was abandoning a financially helpless woman, I had actually been building the resources to destroy them both. I drafted a response to Crystal's blackmail attempt. Interesting proposition. But before I consider your terms, I'm curious about your previous work in Phoenix and Dallas. Your portfolio is quite impressive, though I notice some gaps in your employment history. Perhaps we should meet in person to discuss this arrangement properly. The message was deliberately ambiguous, letting her know I'd discovered her history without revealing the full extent of my knowledge. I wanted her to make the next move, to reveal more of her hand while she still believed she held all the cards. Within minutes, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. "You think you're clever," Crystal's voice was sharp, no longer the sultry whisper she probably used on her marks. "But you have no idea what you're dealing with. I've been doing this longer than you've been married." "I'm sure you have," I replied calmly. "Which is exactly why we should meet." I have a proposition that might interest a woman of your talents. The line went quiet for several seconds. What kind of proposition? The kind that could be very profitable for both of us. Unless, of course, you prefer the uncertainty of running from your past forever. The hook was set. Now I just had to reel her in. Crystal agreed to meet at Meridian Cafe, an upscale bistro in downtown where she apparently felt comfortable operating, probably because she'd used it before to scout potential marks. I arrived 30 minutes early, choosing a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances, and watched her walk in like she owned the place. In person, Crystal Rossi was even more calculating than her photos suggested. She moved with the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to being the most attractive woman in any room, her designer outfit perfectly chosen to project success without appearing desperate. But I noticed the details that betrayed her true nature, the way her eyes constantly scanned the room, cataloging exit routes and assessing other patrons for potential opportunities. "Haley," she said, sliding into the seat across from me with a smile that never reached her eyes. "You're prettier than your photos. I can see why Derek felt guilty about leaving you." The casual cruelty of the comment was clearly intended to establish dominance, to make me feel small and discarded. Instead, I found myself genuinely impressed by her psychological manipulation skills. This woman was a professional. "Thank you," I replied evenly. "And you're exactly what I expected." Derek always had predictable tastes. Something flickered across her expression, surprise perhaps that I wasn't collapsing into tears or begging her to return my husband. She recovered quickly, leaning forward with predatory interest. "So what's this proposition you mentioned? I hope you're not going to waste my time trying to negotiate some pathetic payment plan for Derek's debts." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table, opening to a carefully curated folder of screenshots. "Actually, I wanted to show you something fascinating I discovered while researching your background." Her posture stiffened almost imperceptibly as I swiped through images, newspaper articles about her previous victims, court records, social media profiles under different names. But it was the final screenshot that made her face go completely pale. "This is particularly interesting," I said, displaying a bank routing number and account details. "It seems all your victims' money eventually flows through the same offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Very efficient operation you're running." Crystal's mask finally slipped completely. "You have no idea what you're playing with," she hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Derek told me you were some helpless housewife, but you're starting to look like a problem." "Oh, I'm definitely a problem," I agreed cheerfully. "But not the kind you're used to dealing with. See, your usual marks are successful men with fragile egos who can't handle the embarrassment of admitting they were fooled by a beautiful woman. They pay your blackmail demands and slink away quietly." I leaned forward, matching her earlier predatory posture. "But I'm not a fragile ego man, Crystal. I'm a woman you robbed and I have resources you can't imagine." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Resources? Honey, I've seen your joint bank account. Derek left you with pocket change." "Derek sees what I wanted him to see," I replied. "Just like you only see what I'm choosing to show you right now." I swiped to another folder on my phone, this one containing documentation of every financial transaction Crystal had made in the past 6 months. Her face went white as she recognized hotel receipts, restaurant charges, jewelry purchases, all traced back to accounts she thought were anonymous. "How did you?" she started, then caught herself. "I'm very good with numbers, Crystal, and patterns. For instance, I noticed that you always transfer your victims' money through a series of shell companies before it reaches your main account. Very sophisticated, but every digital transaction leaves traces if you know where to look." The confidence was draining from her face by the second. This wasn't going according to any script she'd rehearsed. "What do you want?" she asked. "Finally, I want to understand exactly how long you've been working my husband," I said. "Because this wasn't a chance encounter, was it? You targeted him specifically." Crystal stared at me for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she seemed to reach a decision. "Fine. You want the truth. I've been planning this for 8 months. Derek wasn't random. I research my marks very carefully. What made him attractive to you? His financial consulting business, obviously. Access to client accounts, established trust relationships with wealthy retirees. Plus his social media showed the perfect profile, successful man with a beautiful wife who he obviously took for granted. She smiled coldly. Men like that are desperate to prove they're still desirable. They're easy targets. The casual way she described manipulating my marriage was chilling, but I kept my expression neutral, and the plan was always to drain his accounts and disappear. Initially, yes. But then I discovered how much debt I could rack up in both your names before anyone noticed. Credit cards, personal loans, business lines of credit. Derek was surprisingly willing to sign anything I asked him to, especially after I convinced him that you were cheating on him. My blood went cold. Excuse me. Crystal's smile turned vicious.
Hey!
Oh yes, that was my masterpiece. I created an entire fictional affair for you, complete with fake text messages, staged photos, even hired an actor to play your supposed lover. Derek was so hurt and angry that he wanted to punish you financially before he left. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Derek hadn't just fallen for Crystal's romantic manipulation, he genuinely believed I had betrayed him first. In his mind, the debt he was leaving me with was justified revenge for infidelity that had never happened. You made him think I was cheating, I said slowly, so he'd feel justified destroying me financially. Exactly. Guilt makes people hesitant. Righteous anger makes them vicious. Crystal looked genuinely proud of her psychological manipulation. By the time we left for Monaco, Derek wasn't just running away with a new love, he was convinced he was getting revenge on an unfaithful wife. The sheer calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. She hadn't just stolen my husband, she'd poisoned his memories of our entire marriage, ensuring he'd feel good about leaving me in financial ruin. That was a mistake, I said quietly. What was? Making it personal. Crystal's revelation about the fabricated affair had shaken me more than I wanted to admit, but I couldn't afford to process that emotional blow yet. I needed professional help, and I needed it immediately. After our tense cafe meeting ended with Crystal's parting threat, you have 72 hours to decide if you want to pay up quietly or watch your life become very public and very messy. I drove straight to the offices of Morrison & Hart, the most aggressive litigation firm in the city. Ezra Morrison was a shark in an expensive suit, the kind of attorney who specialized in high-stakes divorces and white-collar criminal defense. His corner office overlooked the financial district, and his walls were lined with photographs of him shaking hands with politicians, judges, and Fortune 500 executives. If anyone could navigate the legal minefield Crystal and Derek had created, it would be him. Mrs. Calder, he said after I'd spent an hour outlining the situation, I have to be brutally honest with you. This is one of the most complex cases I've seen in 20 years of practice. He spread the documentation I'd brought across his mahogany conference table, printouts of the embezzled client funds, evidence of Crystal's scamming operation, records of the fraudulent debt accumulated in my name, and the fake affair evidence she'd used to manipulate Derek. The good news is that you have extensive documentation of criminal activity. The bad news is that you're legally married to one of the criminals, which means you're potentially liable for his actions under spousal debt laws. My stomach sank. What does that mean practically? It means that even though you can prove Derek accumulated this debt without your knowledge or consent, creditors can still pursue you for payment. Marriage creates a legal partnership, and in most states, both spouses are responsible for debts incurred during the marriage, regardless of who actually signed the paperwork. Ezra pulled up a legal database on his laptop, scrolling through relevant statutes. The embezzlement from client accounts actually works in your favor. If we can prove criminal activity, we can argue that you shouldn't be held responsible for the proceeds of crimes you didn't know about. But the personal loans, credit cards, and mortgages are trickier. What about Crystal's blackmail? Surely that changes things. It helps establish a pattern of fraud and coercion, but it doesn't automatically absolve you of the debt. We'd need to prove that Derek was acting under duress, or that Crystal was controlling his financial decisions. He paused, studying the timeline I'd created. The fabricated affair evidence is actually our strongest angle. How so? If we can demonstrate that Derek was manipulated into accumulating debt based on false information, that his financial decisions were the direct result of psychological manipulation and fraud, we might be able to argue that the debts were incurred through criminal deception, rather than legitimate marital decisions. Ezra leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. But here's the reality, Mrs. Calder. Even with all this evidence, you're looking at months or potentially years of litigation. Criminal charges against your husband and his girlfriend could take just as long to prosecute. Meanwhile, creditors aren't going to wait for legal proceedings to conclude. He pulled out a calculator and started running numbers. You mentioned the total debt is approximately $485,000. Even if we successfully argue that you shouldn't be responsible for all of it, you're likely looking at legal fees in the six-figure range. The house could be seized to satisfy the debts, your credit will be destroyed, and there's no guarantee we'll recover anything from your husband's stolen assets, assuming we can even locate them in offshore accounts. The weight of the situation was crushing. Even with all the evidence I'd gathered, even with proof of criminal activity, the legal system wasn't designed to provide quick relief for victims of financial fraud. There's another complication, Ezra continued. If you're planning to pursue Crystal Rossi criminally, you need to understand that she's likely judgment-proof. Professional scammers rarely keep assets in their own names. Everything she's stolen is probably hidden in shell companies, offshore accounts, or converted to untraceable assets. So even if we win, we might not recover anything. Exactly. And pursuing her criminally could actually work against you in the civil proceedings. If she's facing serious jail time, she has every incentive to disappear with whatever money she's stolen rather than cooperating with asset recovery. I felt the walls closing in around me. The legal system that should have protected victims seemed designed to favor criminals who were sophisticated enough to exploit its weaknesses. What would you recommend? I asked finally. Ezra was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his words carefully. Honestly, if you were my sister, I'd tell you to consider bankruptcy. Cut your losses, discharge as much debt as possible, and start over. Fighting this could cost you everything you have and more. And if I did want to fight it, then we'd need to discuss a substantial retainer, probably $75,000 to start, and you'd need to be prepared for a long, expensive battle with no guarantee of success. He closed the laptop and looked at me directly. Mrs. Calder, I've seen too many people destroy themselves financially trying to pursue justice against criminals who've already demonstrated they have no conscience. Sometimes the smartest move is strategic retreat. As I drove home from Ezra's office, his words echoed in my mind. Strategic retreat. The phrase felt like surrender, like admitting that Crystal and Derek had won through sheer audacity and careful planning. But Ezra Morrison didn't know about my hidden $12.3 million portfolio. He'd given me advice based on the assumption that I was exactly what I appeared to be, a financially dependent housewife facing ruin. His recommendation for strategic retreat was sound legal counsel for someone in that position. The problem was, I wasn't that person, I never had been. That evening, I sat in my home office, staring at my investment accounts and considering my options. The legal system might be slow and expensive, but I had resources that Crystal and Derek couldn't even imagine. More importantly, I had something they'd fatally underestimated: patience, planning ability, and the kind of cold analytical thinking that had built my secret fortune in the first place. Ezra Morrison had told me the smart move was strategic retreat, but he'd also unknowingly given me something more valuable: a complete understanding of exactly how the legal system would handle this case, and all the ways it could be manipulated by someone with sufficient resources and strategic thinking. Crystal had made a career of exploiting people's weaknesses. It was time to show her what happened when she picked a target who didn't have any. 3 days after my sobering meeting with Ezra Morrison, I was drowning my sorrows in expensive wine and contemplating the nuclear option of exposing everything when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Given recent events, I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up on the fourth ring. Is this Haley Calder? The voice was professional, female, with the crisp efficiency of someone used to making important calls. Yes. Who's calling? This is Sabrina Reese from Pinnacle Financial Investigations. I specialize in asset recovery and financial fraud cases. I understand you might be dealing with some complex financial issues involving overseas accounts and romantic fraud. My blood ran cold. How could anyone know about my situation? I'd been meticulously careful about who I'd spoken to, and neither Crystal nor Derek knew I was investigating them. I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong person, I said carefully. Mrs. Calder, I know this is unexpected, but I've been tracking Crystal Rossi's operation for 18 months. She's been on our radar since the Phoenix incident, and when certain financial patterns appeared in Monaco that matched her previous work, it triggered alerts in our system. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of alerts? The kind that suggest she's escalated from simple romance fraud to something much more sophisticated. May I ask, has she attempted to blackmail you yet? The directness of the question caught me off guard. Who are you really? I'm a former FBI financial crimes investigator, who now runs a private firm specializing in recovering assets from international fraud schemes. Crystal Rossi has stolen approximately $2.3 million from 7 verified victims over the past 3 years, and we believe your husband's case represents a significant escalation in her methods. Sabrina's voice carried the authority of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. Mrs. Calder, I'm going to be direct with you. Crystal chose your husband not just because he had access to client funds, but because our intelligence suggests she's been planning something much bigger than her usual romance scams. We think she's building toward a major financial crime, and your husband was meant to be the vehicle. What kind of major financial crime? We believe she's using the money from multiple victims to capitalize a sophisticated investment fraud scheme. The Cayman Islands account you've probably discovered is just one node in a network designed to funnel money into fake hedge funds and cryptocurrency schemes targeting high net worth individuals. I felt the pieces clicking into place. Crystal's operation was far more complex than I'd realized. She wasn't just a romance scammer, she was building infrastructure for large-scale financial fraud. But here's the thing, Sabrina continued. She made a crucial error with your case. The fake affair evidence she created to manipulate your husband was sloppy. She used the same actor she'd used in a previous scam, and she was careless with digital footprints. We have enough evidence to bring criminal charges, but we need someone on the inside who can help us document her current activities. Someone on the inside. Someone she trusts, someone she's already revealed her methods to, someone who might be able to get close enough to gather the evidence we need to shut down her entire operation and recover assets for all her victims. The implication was clear, and it was terrifying. You want me to go undercover against a professional criminal. I want to offer you an opportunity to not just recover your own losses, but to help bring down someone who's destroyed dozens of lives. Mrs. Calder, Crystal Rossi is planning something that could steal millions from retirees and middle-class investors. Your husband's embezzlement from client accounts suggests she's already moving in that direction. Sabrina paused, letting that sink in. But I should mention, we know about your hidden assets. My heart stopped. What? Your investment portfolio under your maiden name, the offshore accounts, the real estate holdings. Mrs. Calder, when we investigate financial fraud, we investigate everyone involved. We know you're not the helpless housewife you've been pretending to be. The careful facade I'd maintained for years was crumbling in real time. How long have you known? About 6 months. Initially, we thought you might be complicit in your husband's activities, but your trading patterns and account structures suggest someone who's been carefully hiding assets from a controlling spouse, rather than laundering criminal proceeds. Relief and terror warred in my chest. The government knew about my secret wealth, but apparently didn't consider it criminal. Mrs. Calder, your financial sophistication actually makes you perfect for this operation. Crystal thinks she's dealing with a naive victim, but you have the resources and intelligence to outmaneuver her if you're willing to take the risk. What kind of risk are we talking about? Crystal has escalated to threats and blackmail with you, which suggests she sees you as a genuine threat to her operation. If you agree to help us, you'd be wearing recording devices during meetings with her, gathering evidence of her broader criminal network, and potentially traveling to Monaco to document her operations there. The scope of what Sabrina was proposing was staggering, and if she discovers what I'm doing, That's the risk. Crystal Rossi has become increasingly desperate and dangerous as law enforcement has closed in on her previous activities. She's been known to threaten physical violence when cornered. I walked to my office window, staring out at the life I'd built through years of careful planning and secret accumulation. Crystal and Derek thought they'd destroyed that life, but they'd actually just revealed how strong its foundation really was. "What would you need from me?" I asked finally. "Your cooperation in building a case that could shut down one of the most sophisticated romance fraud operations we've ever encountered. In exchange, we can offer you immunity for any technical violations regarding undisclosed assets, priority recovery of your stolen funds, and the satisfaction of ensuring Crystal never destroys another family." The opportunity was dangerous, but it was also exactly what I'd been hoping for, a way to turn my hidden strengths against the people who'd betrayed me. "How quickly would you need an answer?" "Crystal's expecting a response to her blackmail demand tomorrow. We'd need to move fast." I looked around my office, at the monitors showing my secret portfolio, at the evidence I'd gathered of Crystal's crimes, at the life I'd built in the shadows of my own marriage. "Let's do it." Working with Sabrina Reese meant diving deep into the psychological manipulation that had controlled my marriage for years, and what I discovered was more disturbing than I'd ever imagined. As we sat in her secure conference room, surrounded by whiteboards covered in financial flowcharts and behavioral analysis, she walked me through how professionals like Crystal operated, and how people like Derek became perfect targets. "The first thing you need to understand," Sabrina explained, pulling up a detailed psychological profile on her laptop, "is that your husband wasn't Crystal's victim. He was her weapon. Everything she did was designed to turn him into someone who would willingly destroy his own life to serve her purposes." She clicked through a series of photographs showing Crystal with different men over the past 3 years. In every image, the same pattern emerged: successful, middle-aged men who looked confident in public, but showed subtle signs of insecurity, expensive clothes that didn't quite fit right, forced smiles that didn't reach their eyes, body language that suggested they were trying too hard to appear successful. "Romance scammers like Crystal are essentially psychological profilers," Sabrina continued. "They don't just target wealthy men, they target men with specific emotional vulnerabilities that can be exploited. Your husband fit the profile perfectly." She pulled up a detailed analysis of Derek's social media presence going back 5 years. What I saw made my stomach churn with recognition. Post after post showed him subtly positioning himself as more successful than he actually was. Photos of expensive restaurants he'd taken me to for special occasions, presented as regular dining experiences, pictures of luxury cars at dealerships, captioned as if he owned them, business achievements inflated to sound more impressive. "Classic inadequacy masquerading as confidence," Sabrina noted. "Men like this are desperate for external validation of their worth. They're also typically in relationships where they feel the need to maintain a superior position to protect their ego." The implication hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying he was vulnerable to Crystal because of our marriage dynamic." "I'm saying Crystal identified that your husband was a man who needed to feel dominant in his relationship, but was secretly insecure about his actual capabilities. That made him perfect for her purposes, someone who could be manipulated through ego gratification while simultaneously being resentful enough of his current situation to justify destructive behavior." Sabrina opened another file, this one containing transcripts of recorded conversations between Crystal and her previous victims. Reading them was like watching a masterclass in psychological manipulation. "Notice the pattern," she said, highlighting specific phrases. "She always starts by making them feel like they're the most interesting man she's ever met. But it's not generic flattery, it's targeted praise designed to address their specific insecurities." The transcripts were chilling in their precision. Crystal would identify exactly what each man needed to hear: validation about their intelligence, their business acumen, their attractiveness, and then provide it in carefully measured doses. But more importantly, she would subtly undermine their existing relationships. "She doesn't directly criticize their wives or girlfriends," Sabrina explained. "Instead, she positions herself as someone who truly appreciates qualities that their current partners supposedly don't recognize or value. It's incredibly effective, because it makes the men feel like they've been unappreciated for years." I thought about my own marriage, about all the times I'd bitten my tongue when Derek made financial decisions I disagreed with, all the times I'd played down my own capabilities to protect his ego. I'd thought I was being supportive, but I'd actually been creating the exact dynamic Crystal needed to exploit. The fake affair evidence she created about you was particularly sophisticated, Sabrina continued, pulling up the fabricated text messages and staged photographs Crystal had used to convince Derek I was cheating. She didn't just make him believe you were unfaithful, she made him believe you were unfaithful with someone who had all the qualities he was insecure about. The fictional affair Crystal had created was with a successful investment banker who drove an expensive car and lived in a luxury apartment. In Crystal's manufactured evidence, this imaginary man was everything Derek secretly feared he wasn't: financially sophisticated, naturally confident, and effortlessly successful. By the time she finished, your husband wasn't just angry about infidelity, Sabrina explained. He was convinced that you'd always seen him as inferior, that your entire marriage had been you settling for less while waiting for someone better to come along. The psychological precision was breathtaking and horrifying. Crystal had identified every insecurity Derek had about our relationship and weaponized them against both of us. But here's what I find most interesting about your case, Sabrina said, turning to a new section of her analysis. Crystal usually targets men who are isolated from strong support networks, men whose egos have been gradually separated from reality. Your husband had all the psychological vulnerabilities she looks for, but you represented an unexpected variable. What do you mean? Most of her victims' wives are actually financially dependent and socially isolated, exactly what your husband believed about you. But Crystal didn't do her homework thoroughly enough. She saw the surface dynamic of your marriage and assumed you fit the typical pattern of a financially powerless wife who would collapse under pressure. Sabrina pulled up financial records showing my hidden investment activity over the past 5 years. What she couldn't have anticipated was that you were essentially running a parallel financial life that demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking and emotional control that makes people dangerous to criminals like her. The analysis of my trading patterns and investment strategies filled several pages. Sabrina had clearly spent considerable time studying my methods. The way you built your portfolio shows someone who's capable of long-term planning, risk assessment, and maintaining operational security under pressure. Those are exactly the skills needed to outmaneuver someone like Crystal Rossi. As I absorbed this analysis, I realized that my marriage hadn't just been destroyed by Crystal's manipulation, it had been built on a foundation that made that manipulation inevitable. Derek's need to feel superior had required me to appear inferior, and that dynamic had created exactly the vulnerability Crystal needed to exploit. So my marriage was doomed from the beginning, I said quietly. Your marriage was built on a lie, Sabrina corrected. But now we're going to use that lie against the person who weaponized it. The next morning, I walked into Pinnacle Financial Investigations as someone completely different from the woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal just a week earlier. Sabrina had assembled a team of specialists who would help me navigate the dangerous game of infiltrating Crystal's operation, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was moving from defense to offense. Meet your new best friends, Sabrina said, introducing me to the team in their secure conference room. Aaron Coleman, our tech specialist who will be handling surveillance equipment and digital forensics. Janie Rossi, yes, she uses the same last name Crystal stole, our behavioral analyst who specializes in criminal psychology. And Norman Calder, no relation to you, our financial crimes specialist who will be tracking money movements in real time. Each team member had been specifically chosen for their expertise in dealing with sophisticated fraud operations. Aaron looked like he'd stepped out of a cybersecurity thriller, with multiple monitors showing encrypted communications and financial data streams. Janie carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent years studying how criminals think. Norman's desk was covered with international banking regulations and asset recovery protocols. The first thing we need to establish, Janie explained, is your cover story for why you're suddenly willing to cooperate with Crystal's demands. She's going to be suspicious of any dramatic personality change, so we need a narrative that explains your apparent capitulation while positioning you to gather intelligence. We spent 2 hours crafting my new persona, a woman who'd been broken by the discovery of her husband's betrayal and was now desperate to avoid public humiliation. The story would be that I'd consulted with lawyers and realized I couldn't afford to fight the debt legally, so I was willing to pay Crystal's blackmail demands in exchange for her discretion. The beauty of this approach, Aaron added, is that it plays directly into Crystal's ego. She'll think her psychological manipulation worked perfectly, that she's successfully reduced you to a compliant victim. That overconfidence will make her careless. Norman pulled up a complex financial diagram showing Crystal's money movement patterns. We've identified 17 different shell companies and offshore accounts connected to her operation. If we can get her to reveal the control structures for even half of these, we can freeze assets across multiple jurisdictions and recover funds for dozens of victims. The scope of Crystal's criminal enterprise was staggering. This wasn't just romance fraud, it was international money laundering on a massive scale, with my husband's embezzlement being just one component of a much larger scheme. "Here's what we need you to do," Sabrina explained, handing me a detailed mission briefing. "Crystal is expecting you to contact her with your decision about the blackmail. When you call, you need to sound defeated but also curious about her business methods. Express admiration for her intelligence and success, stroke her ego while gathering information." Janie leaned forward, her expression serious. Criminals like Crystal often can't resist bragging about their accomplishments to people they think they've defeated. If you position yourself as someone who's impressed by her sophistication, rather than someone who's angry about being victimized, she might reveal more than she intends. Aaron handed me a device that looked like an ordinary smartphone but was actually a sophisticated recording system. "This will capture everything: audio, video, GPS location data, even ambient conversations when you're not actively using it. The data uploads automatically to our secure servers, so even if something happens to the device, we'll have real-time intelligence." The weight of what I was about to do settled over me. I would be deliberately walking into the orbit of someone who had already demonstrated she was willing to destroy lives for financial gain. But I also realized that for the first time in my adult life, I was operating from a position of genuine strength rather than hidden vulnerability. "There's one more thing," Norman said, pulling up records of my secret investment accounts. "We've been authorized to offer you something unprecedented: full immunity for any technical violations regarding undisclosed assets, plus priority recovery status for your stolen funds. But more importantly, we can help you restructure your hidden wealth to protect it from any future legal complications." The offer was incredible. Not only would I be protected from prosecution for maintaining secret accounts, but I'd gain access to the kind of professional financial protection services that were usually reserved for billionaires and multinational corporations. "Why are you offering so much?" I asked. Sabrina's expression grew grim. "Because Crystal Rossi isn't just stealing money, she's funding something much bigger. We have intelligence suggesting she's connected to an international criminal organization that's planning to launch coordinated financial attacks against retirement systems and pension funds. Stopping her isn't just about justice for her current victims, it's about preventing financial crimes that could affect hundreds of thousands of people." The stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined, but so was my capacity to make a difference. I looked around the room at these professionals who were treating me as an equal partner rather than a helpless victim, and realized that Crystal's manipulation had inadvertently revealed capabilities I'd never known I possessed. "When do I make the call?" I asked. "Right now," Sabrina replied, sliding a secure phone across the table. "It's time to let Crystal think she's won." The phone rang 3 times before Crystal's familiar voice answered, but something in her tone had shifted since our cafe meeting. Where before there had been predatory confidence, now I detected an edge of impatience, even concern. "Haley, I was beginning to think you'd decided to do something stupid." I took a deep breath, channeling the defeated housewife persona Janie had coached me to project. "I've been thinking about what you said, about keeping this quiet and avoiding a public scandal. And I spoke with a lawyer. You were right, fighting this could cost me everything I have left. I can't afford years of litigation, especially not with my reputation destroyed by those photos you mentioned." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. I could almost hear Crystal recalibrating, adjusting her approach based on what she perceived as my capitulation. "Smart girl," she said finally. and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Derek said you were more intelligent than most of his clients' wives. I'm glad you're proving him right. The casual cruelty of comparing me to other women whose lives she'd probably helped destroy was breathtaking, but I forced myself to sound grateful rather than disgusted. I have to ask though, how did you do it? The whole operation, I mean. It's actually quite impressive from a business perspective. Crystal's laugh was genuine this time, warm with the pleasure of recognition. Most people never appreciate the skill involved, they just see a pretty face and assume everything came easily. But it's not easy, is it? Managing multiple identities, coordinating financial transfers, maintaining the psychological manipulation over months, that takes real intelligence and planning. Exactly. Crystal's voice brightened noticeably. Do you know how many moving parts are involved in something like this? Banking regulations in different countries, identity documentation, social engineering, psychological profiling. It's like running a multinational corporation. I could hear Aaron typing furiously in the background, probably cross-referencing everything Crystal was revealing against their existing intelligence. The recording device felt warm in my palm as I pushed for more details. How did you even get started in something like this? It seems so complex for someone to figure out on their own. Oh, I didn't figure it out alone, Crystal said, and I could hear her settling in for what sounded like a longer conversation. I started working for someone else about 4 years ago, someone who taught me the ropes, but I was always better at the psychological side than my mentor expected. Sabrina leaned forward, her eyes wide. This was intelligence they clearly hadn't anticipated. Someone taught you? I asked, trying to sound impressed rather than investigative. A woman named Elena Vasquez. She ran romance scams, targeting tech executives in Silicon Valley, but her methods were too crude. She relied on obvious emotional manipulation and got greedy too quickly. I refined the approach, made it more sophisticated. Crystal's voice carried the pride of someone discussing a professional achievement. Elena would drain one victim and move on. I realized you could extract much more value by maintaining longer-term relationships and expanding into related criminal activities. Related activities, identity theft from the primary target's social circle, investment fraud using their professional credentials, even using their businesses as fronts for money laundering. Derek's consulting firm, for example. Do you know how easy it is to create fake investment products when you have access to a legitimate financial advisor's credentials? My blood ran cold. Crystal wasn't just stealing from Derek's clients, she was using his professional reputation to commit securities fraud against other investors. That's brilliant, I managed to say. How many investors are involved, currently? About 300 people think they're invested in a hedge fund that Derek manages. They're seeing steady returns on their statements, never knowing their money is actually funding our lifestyle, while we build toward the big score. The scope was staggering. Crystal had turned my husband into the face of a Ponzi scheme that was defrauding hundreds of investors. The big score? Crystal's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Elena's planning something major, a coordinated attack on pension fund systems that could net tens of millions. But she needs more infrastructure, more legitimate front companies. That's why Derek was so valuable. His client relationships and professional credentials give us access to institutional investment networks. Norman was scribbling notes frantically, while Sabrina spoke quietly into another phone, probably alerting federal authorities about the pension fund threat. And now that you've left him in Monaco, how does that work? Oh, Derek's not staying in Monaco, Crystal laughed. That was just to throw off any investigators who might be tracking our movements. We're actually in Switzerland, setting up the infrastructure for the pension fund operation. Derek thinks he's helping me start a legitimate consulting business, but really he's building the framework for the biggest financial crime in Elena's career. As Crystal continued describing their plans, I realized that fate had placed me in the perfect position to stop not just my husband's betrayal, but a criminal conspiracy that could devastate the retirement security of thousands of innocent people. Crystal, I said carefully, I'm actually quite impressed. Would you be interested in meeting again? I think we might be able to help each other more than you initially realized. Crystal agreed to meet the next evening at the Grandview Hotel's rooftop bar, a location she chose because it was public enough to feel safe but exclusive enough to avoid unwanted attention. As I rode the elevator to the 23rd floor, Aaron's voice crackled through my nearly invisible earpiece. Remember, she's going to test you tonight. Everything you say will be analyzed for signs that you're not who you're pretending to be. Stay in character. You're a desperate housewife who's impressed by her intelligence and wants to learn from her success. The elevator doors opened onto a dimly lit lounge with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Crystal had chosen a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances, just as I'd expected. She looked different tonight, more relaxed, almost celebratory, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Haley," she said, standing to embrace me like we were old friends rather than adversaries. "You look better, less shell-shocked." "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "About everything you said yesterday, about intelligence not being appreciated." Crystal signaled the waitress and ordered champagne without consulting me. "I'm glad you're seeing this situation more clearly. Most people never get past the emotional reaction to appreciate the artistry involved." "That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about," I said, leaning forward with carefully practiced enthusiasm. "The way you've structured everything, it's like a masterclass in strategic thinking. I've been wondering if there might be ways I could be useful to someone with your skills." Her eyes narrowed slightly, and I could see her psychological machinery working, trying to determine if this was genuine admiration or sophisticated manipulation. "Useful how?" "Well, you mentioned yesterday that you're building infrastructure for larger operations. I may have been naive about Derek's activities, but I'm not naive about business. I understand strategic partnerships." I pulled out my phone and showed her a carefully prepared document that Aaron had helped me create, a business plan for a luxury lifestyle consulting firm that would cater to wealthy women seeking financial independence. "I've been thinking about starting fresh," I continued, "building something that leverages my social connections and understanding of affluent circles. But after talking to you, I realize I've been thinking too small." Crystal examined the business plan with genuine interest, her predatory instincts clearly engaged. "This is more sophisticated than I expected from someone in your position." "Like I said, I've been underestimated before." I met her gaze directly. "The question is whether someone with your experience would be interested in a partnership with someone who has access to social circles you might find profitable." For the first time since I'd met her, Crystal looked genuinely surprised. "You're proposing that we work together." "I'm proposing that we recognize mutual advantages. You have expertise in financial extraction and international operations. I have access to wealthy social networks and a clean reputation that could open doors your previous activities might have closed." Crystal leaned back in her chair, studying me with new intensity. "And what would you get out of this arrangement?" "Financial security, obviously, but more than that, I'd get to learn from someone who's clearly mastered skills I never knew I needed." I paused, letting vulnerability creep into my voice. "Derek made me feel helpless for years. You've shown me that helplessness is a choice." The champagne arrived, and Crystal poured 2 glasses with ceremonial precision. "You know, Haley, I may have misjudged you initially. Most women in your situation would be focused on revenge or getting their husband back. But you're talking about evolution." "Revenge is emotional," I replied, accepting the champagne. "Evolution is profitable." Crystal raised her glass in a toast to profitable evolution. As we drank, I could see her making calculations, weighing the potential benefits of bringing me into her operation against the risks of trusting someone she'd recently blackmailed. "There would need to be trust-building exercises," she said finally. "Ways for us to demonstrate mutual commitment before any serious collaboration could begin." "Of course. What did you have in mind?" "Well, first, you'd need to prove you're serious about moving beyond conventional morality. The kind of work I do requires flexibility regarding legal boundaries." I nodded as if this was exactly what I'd hoped to hear. I assumed as much. "What kind of proof would you need?" Crystal's smile turned predatory. "There's a pension fund administrator in your social circle. Margaret Chen from the country club. She handles retirement accounts for 3 major corporations in the city. We need access to her login credentials and security protocols. My heart raced as I realized she was asking me to help facilitate the pension fund attack she'd mentioned. Through my earpiece, I could hear Aaron's sharp intake of breath. Margaret's been a friend for years, I said carefully. How would you suggest I approach that? Social engineering. Invite her for coffee, express concern about your own retirement security given Derek's abandonment, ask her to show you how the system works. People love feeling important by sharing their expertise. Crystal outlined the plan with clinical precision: how to gain Margaret's trust, extract her credentials, and provide access to retirement accounts containing millions of dollars. Once we have that access, Crystal continued, we'll know if you're serious about this partnership. We belisipsat, she read. And if you are, I'll introduce you to Elena. She's always looking for partners with your kind of social access. As Crystal detailed the criminal conspiracy I was supposed to help execute, I realized I was no longer just gathering evidence about past crimes. I was being recruited to prevent future ones. The morning after my rooftop meeting with Crystal, I arrived at Pinnacle Financial Investigations to find the team in a state of controlled chaos. Multiple federal agencies had been alerted overnight, and the conference room looked like a war room, with new whiteboards covered in organizational charts and timeline analyses. The pension fund attack is happening faster than we anticipated, Sabrina said without preamble. Based on Crystal's conversation with you last night, we think they're planning to execute within the next 2 weeks, not months. Aaron pulled up a complex network diagram on his largest monitor. We've been tracking the Elena Vasquez connection all night. She's not just some mentor figure, she's the head of an international criminal organization that's been responsible for over $50 million in retirement fund theft across 7 countries. The scope was breathtaking. What I'd thought was a relatively small-scale romance scam had revealed itself as part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise targeting the financial security of ordinary working people. But there's something else, Janie said, her expression grim. We intercepted communications between Crystal and Elena early this morning. They're not just planning to steal from pension funds, they're planning to crash them entirely. She displayed a series of encrypted messages on her screen, translated from what appeared to be a complex code. Elena's organization doesn't just extract money and disappear, they manipulate the remaining investments to create cascading failures that destroy the entire fund, making their theft look like market crashes rather than criminal activity. Norman added, if they succeed with the 3 pension funds Crystal mentioned, it won't just be theft, it'll be the complete destruction of retirement security for over 40,000 people. The weight of responsibility was crushing. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, they were teachers, nurses, municipal workers, and small business employees who had spent decades contributing to retirement funds that could be wiped out overnight. There's more, Sabrina continued. Crystal's request for you to target Margaret Chen isn't random. We've discovered that Margaret has administrative access to a central clearinghouse that processes transactions for multiple pension systems. If Elena's organization gains control of that access, they could potentially attack pension funds nationwide. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the implications. So Crystal wasn't just recruiting me for a single crime, she was positioning me to enable a massive financial attack. Exactly. And based on our analysis of Elena's previous operations, once they have what they need from you, you become a liability. People who can identify Elena's organization tend to have accidents or simply disappear. Aaron pulled up a series of news articles from different countries. Businessman D's in apparent skiing accident after reporting investment fraud. Former romance scam victim found dead in hotel room. Financial consultant disappears during investigation. Elena doesn't leave witnesses, he said quietly. If you help them access the pension systems, you won't live long enough to regret it. The room fell silent as the full danger of my situation became clear. I wasn't just helping to catch criminals, I was walking into the territory of people who killed to protect their operations. However, Sabrina said, we may have found Elena's weakness. She's been careful to stay in the shadows, but Crystal's ego makes her vulnerable. If we can convince Crystal to arrange a meeting with Elena, we might be able to take down the entire organization. Janie leaned forward. The key is making Crystal believe that you're so valuable as a partner that Elena needs to meet you personally. You'd need to offer something that seems too good to pass up. What kind of offer? Norman opened a new file on his laptop. Your secret wealth. If we can make Elena believe that you're not just offering access to Margaret Chen's pension systems, but also bringing $12 million in investment capital to help fund their operations, she might take the risk of meeting face to face. The plan was audacious and terrifying. I would be offering my actual hidden fortune as bait to lure one of the world's most dangerous financial criminals into a trap. But how do we prove I have that money without actually giving them access to it? Aaron smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. We create fake account statements showing even more money than you actually have. Elena's organization specializes in financial deception. They'll be impressed by documentation that appears to show sophisticated wealth management strategies. We're talking about fabricating evidence of a $25 million portfolio, Sabrina added. Enough to make Elena believe that partnering with you could fund their operations for years, rather than just providing access to a single pension system. The irony was perfect. The same skills I'd used to hide my wealth from Derek would now be weaponized against the criminals who had destroyed my marriage. There's one more element, Janie said. To make this completely convincing, you'll need to demonstrate your commitment by actually going through with approaching Margaret Chen. But instead of stealing her credentials, you'll be giving her advance warning about the attack while gathering intelligence about Elena's specific targets. I looked around the room at these federal agents and financial investigators who were asking me to risk everything to stop a crime that could devastate thousands of innocent families. When do we start? I asked. Tomorrow, Sabrina replied. Crystal is expecting an update on your progress with Margaret. It's time to show her exactly how valuable a partner you can be. The next 24 hours transformed me from an undercover informant into the architect of an elaborate counterintelligence operation. Sitting in Pinnacle's secure planning room, I found myself designing a strategy that would use every skill I developed during 5 years of secret wealth accumulation, combined with everything Crystal had unknowingly taught me about psychological manipulation. The key to this entire operation, I explained to the assembled team, is that Crystal believes she's turned me from victim to accomplice. She thinks my admiration for her intelligence is genuine, and that my willingness to commit crimes proves I'm fully under her influence. Sabrina nodded, studying the detailed plan I'd outlined on the whiteboard. But Elena will be more suspicious. She didn't personally manipulate you, so she'll be looking for signs that your conversion isn't authentic. Which is why the financial documentation has to be perfect, Norman added, spreading fake portfolio statements across the conference table. These documents need to show not just wealth, but the kind of sophisticated international investment strategies that would impress someone running a global criminal operation. Aaron had spent the morning creating what he called the most convincing fake financial records in federal law enforcement history. The fabricated portfolio showed $27 million in assets spread across offshore accounts, cryptocurrency holdings, rare metals investments, and private equity funds, all structured in ways that suggested I had been secretly building wealth for years while maintaining operational security. The beauty of this approach, Aaron explained, is that the investment strategies shown in these fake documents are actually based on real methods used by international criminals to hide stolen assets. Elena will recognize the sophistication and assume you're already operating at her level. But the most crucial element was my planned approach to Margaret Chen. Rather than simply warning her about the attack, we had developed a strategy that would allow me to gather detailed intelligence about the pension fund systems while actually strengthening their security. Margaret thinks you're meeting her for coffee to discuss your own retirement planning after Derek's abandonment, Janie said, reviewing the psychological profile we'd developed. She's naturally helpful and wants to educate people about financial security. If you approach this correctly, she'll volunteer information about system vulnerabilities while thinking she's helping a friend. The plan was elegant in its complexity. I would genuinely seek Margaret's advice about retirement planning, expressing realistic concerns about rebuilding my financial security. During our conversation, I would ask questions that seemed motivated by personal anxiety, but would actually reveal the specific security protocols Elena's organization needed to bypass. Meanwhile, Sabrina continued, we'll be monitoring Margaret's systems in real time. If Crystal's organization attempts to use any information you provide, we'll track their activities and potentially identify other members of Elena's network. Norman pulled up a map showing pension fund locations across 3 states. Based on Crystal's communications, we believe Elena is targeting funds that serve municipal employees, teachers, and healthcare workers. These funds typically have lower security budgets and less sophisticated protection systems. The targeting was particularly cruel. Elena's organization was deliberately preying on the retirement security of public service workers who had dedicated their careers to helping others. There's another element we need to consider, I said, studying the timeline we'd created. Crystal mentioned that Derek thinks he's helping her start a legitimate consulting business in Switzerland. If he's genuinely unaware of the criminal aspects, he might be willing to cooperate with law enforcement once he understands what's really happening. The team exchanged glances. They had clearly considered this possibility but were reluctant to discuss it. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked. Sabrina sighed. "We've been monitoring communications between Crystal and Derek, based on what we've intercepted. Your husband isn't as innocent as Crystal led you to believe." She pulled up a series of translated messages that made my stomach clench. Derek wasn't just helping Crystal unknowingly, he was actively participating in planning the pension fund attacks, discussing which funds would be easiest to target and how to structure the thefts to avoid detection. "He knows exactly what they're planning," Aaron said quietly. "In fact, some of the targeting strategies appear to be his ideas. He's been providing detailed analysis of pension fund management practices based on his client relationships." The betrayal felt fresh all over again. Not only had Derek abandoned me for a criminal, but he had become a criminal himself, using his professional knowledge to help steal from the same type of people he'd spent years serving as clients. "However," Janie added, "this gives us additional leverage. If we can document Derek's willing participation in planning these crimes, we can use the threat of prosecution to force his cooperation when we move against Elena's organization." I looked at the evidence of my husband's transformation from unfaithful spouse to active criminal, and realized that my emotional connection to him had completely dissolved. The man I'd married no longer existed, if he ever had. "Let's focus on stopping Elena," I said firmly. "Whatever happens to Derek is a consequence of his own choices." As we finalized the operational plan, I felt a strange sense of completion. The woman who had been betrayed and left with crushing debt was gone. In her place stood someone who understood power, strategy, and the precise application of leverage to achieve specific outcomes. Tomorrow I would begin the most dangerous phase of my transformation, convincing one of the world's most sophisticated criminals that I was worthy of her trust. The coffee meeting with Margaret Chen at Bluebird Cafe required preparation unlike anything I'd ever attempted. As I sat across from her at a window table, watching her expertly navigate her tablet to show me retirement planning software, I realized I was simultaneously gathering intelligence for a federal investigation while genuinely learning information that could protect thousands of innocent people. "The thing most people don't understand about pension fund security," Margaret explained, pulling up administrative dashboards that displayed real-time investment data, "is that the human element is usually the weakest link. All the encryption and firewalls in the world can't protect against someone with legitimate access making poor decisions." She was unknowingly describing exactly the vulnerability Elena's organization planned to exploit. As Margaret walked me through various security protocols, I memorized every detail while maintaining the persona of a recently divorced woman anxious about her financial future. "These system access logs are fascinating," I said, leaning forward to study her screen. "How do you monitor for unusual activity?" "We have automated alerts for transactions above certain thresholds, login attempts from unusual locations, and pattern recognition software that flags behaviors inconsistent with normal administrative activities," Margaret replied, clearly pleased to share her expertise. Through my hidden earpiece, I could hear Aaron taking detailed notes. Every security measure Margaret described would help federal agents protect other pension systems from Elena's attacks, but Margaret's next revelation changed everything. "Actually, Haley, I'm glad you're taking retirement security seriously. We've been getting some concerning reports from colleagues in other states about sophisticated attempts to compromise pension fund systems. Just last week, someone in Texas reported that administrators were receiving very convincing phishing emails that appeared to come from federal regulators." My blood ran cold. Elena's organization was already actively probing pension fund defenses across multiple states. The emails requested updated access credentials for a supposed compliance audit, Margaret continued. Fortunately, the administrators in Texas recognized the attempt as fraudulent, but it suggests someone is conducting systematic reconnaissance of pension fund security practices. I needed to warn the team immediately, but couldn't break character. Instead, I expressed appropriate concern while fishing for more details. That's terrifying. Are our local funds vulnerable to the same kind of attack? We like to think our security is more robust, but honestly, these criminals are becoming incredibly sophisticated. They're using social engineering techniques that would fool most people. Margaret lowered her voice conspiratorially. Between you and me, I've been recommending that our board approve funding for a comprehensive security upgrade, but they're reluctant to spend money on theoretical threats. As our conversation continued, I realized that Margaret represented far more than just a target for Elena's organization. She was a potential ally who could help protect pension systems nationwide if she understood the true scope of the threat. After we parted ways, I drove directly to Pinnacle's offices, where the team was analyzing the intelligence I'd gathered in real time through my recording devices. The phishing attempts Margaret described match attack patterns we've seen Elena's organization use in other countries, Sabrina said, studying the transcripts. They're not just planning to attack, they're already conducting reconnaissance. Norman pulled up a map showing recent suspicious activities targeting pension funds across 6 states. If Margaret is right about the timeline, Elena's organization could be ready to execute coordinated attacks within days, not weeks. The acceleration of Elena's timeline meant our carefully planned operation was at risk of being overtaken by events. We needed to move faster than anticipated. There's something else, Aaron added, displaying intercepted communications on his screen. Crystal sent a message to Elena about you 3 hours ago. She's recommending that Elena meet with you personally, describing you as a high-value asset with significant capital and strategic access. Janie studied the message carefully. Crystal's recommendation is stronger than we expected. She's not just vouching for your usefulness, she's positioning you as a potential game-changer for Elena's operations. The fake financial portfolio Aaron had created was working perfectly. Elena apparently believed I could provide both the access to pension systems and the funding to expand her criminal enterprise internationally. Elena's response came back 20 minutes ago, Sabrina said, pulling up the decoded message. She wants to meet you in person but not in the US. She's proposing a meeting in Switzerland, where she's apparently established a secure base of operations. The implications were staggering. Elena was inviting me to travel internationally to meet with her, which would place me completely outside the protection of US law enforcement. Obviously, we can't send you to Switzerland alone, Sabrina continued. But Elena's willingness to meet suggests she sees enormous potential in partnering with you. That gives us leverage to negotiate the terms of the meeting. I studied the team of federal agents and financial investigators who had become my allies in this increasingly complex operation. Each brought expertise I could never have developed alone, but more importantly, they had shown me capabilities I'd never known I possessed. What if we propose a compromise? I suggested. Elena wants to meet, but we need it to happen on our terms, in a location where we can provide adequate protection and support. As we began planning the most dangerous phase of the operation, I realized that the support network I was building extended far beyond this immediate crisis. These relationships represented something I'd never had during my marriage, partnerships based on mutual respect and shared purpose, rather than hidden capabilities and manufactured dependence. The response to Elena's Switzerland invitation required delicate maneuvering that would convince her I was eager to partner while establishing terms that favored our operation. After hours of strategizing with the team, I crafted a message that would demonstrate both sophistication and calculated self-interest. I'm honored by your invitation to meet in Switzerland, I wrote to Crystal, knowing she would forward it to Elena. However, given the sensitive nature of what we're discussing, and my current legal vulnerabilities due to Derek's activities, I need to propose a compromise that protects all parties involved. The message continued with carefully chosen language that would appeal to Elena's criminal instincts while serving our operational needs. What if we arranged a preliminary meeting in a neutral location, where you could evaluate my portfolio documentation, and I could demonstrate my access to the pension fund systems. If that meeting proves mutually beneficial, I'd be happy to travel to Switzerland for more detailed planning. Within 6 hours, Crystal called with Elena's response. Elena is intrigued but cautious, Crystal said, her voice carrying a new note of respect. She's impressed that you're thinking strategically about operational security, rather than just jumping at the opportunity to meet her. Through my earpiece, I could hear Aaron typing furiously, analyzing every word for intelligence value. She's proposed a meeting in Montreal, Crystal continued. It's close enough to the US for your comfort, but international enough that certain business discussions can happen without unwanted oversight. Montreal was perfect for our purposes, close enough for the team to provide support, but international enough to justify Elena traveling there personally. There are conditions though, Crystal added. You need to bring physical documentation of your portfolio, not just digital files, and you need to demonstrate your access to Margaret Chen's systems by providing actual login credentials, not just promises. My heart raced. Elena was demanding proof that could actually compromise pension fund security. Through my earpiece, Sabrina's voice was calm but urgent. Tell her you can provide demonstration access, but not permanent credentials, until after you've met Elena personally. I understand Elena's need for verification, I replied carefully. I can arrange a demonstration of system access that proves my capabilities without compromising operational security until we've established mutual trust. Would that be acceptable? Crystal conferred with someone in the background, presumably Elena, before responding. Elena appreciates your caution. She says it shows you understand the importance of protecting valuable assets. The Montreal meeting is confirmed for this Friday at the Fairmont Queen Elizabeth Hotel. Elena will be traveling under the name Isabella Martinez. As soon as I hung up, the team erupted into controlled activity. This was exactly what we'd hoped for. Elena agreeing to leave her secure base and meet on territory where federal agents could operate. The demonstration access you promised is actually brilliant, Norman explained, pulling up a sophisticated software simulation on his laptop. We've created a perfect replica of the pension fund management system that Margaret showed you. It looks identical to the real thing, but it's completely isolated from actual pension data. Aaron added, Elena's technical people will be able to verify that the interface matches legitimate pension fund systems, but they won't realize they're looking at a carefully constructed honeypot designed to capture information about their attack methods. The fake system was a masterpiece of digital deception. It contained realistic but fabricated pension fund data, functional administrative tools that appeared to control millions in retirement investments, and hidden monitoring software that would track every action Elena's organization attempted. More importantly, Sabrina said, once Elena's people interact with our honeypot system, we'll be able to trace their digital fingerprints back to their actual infrastructure. This could give us access to their entire network. But the most crucial element was the portfolio documentation I would present to Elena. Aaron had created physical binders containing fake financial statements, offshore banking records, and investment summaries that told a compelling story of sophisticated wealth accumulation. The documentation shows a progression from small-scale tax avoidance to increasingly complex international investment strategies, Aaron explained, flipping through the meticulously crafted files. It suggests someone who started with legitimate wealth, but gradually moved into more questionable financial territories. The psychological profile was perfect for Elena's purposes. I would appear to be someone who had already crossed ethical boundaries and was ready to escalate to outright criminality. There's one more element, Janie added. We've arranged for you to have backup in Montreal. A team of federal agents will be positioned throughout the hotel, but Elena won't know they're there unless something goes wrong. As Friday approached, I found myself experiencing a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. The woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal just weeks earlier was about to sit across from one of the world's most dangerous financial criminals and convince her that I was worthy of partnership. But more than that, I was about to help prevent a crime that could devastate the retirement security of tens of thousands of innocent people. The hidden wealth I'd accumulated in secret was becoming the foundation for something far more meaningful than financial independence. It was becoming a weapon for justice. Are you ready for this? Sabrina asked as we reviewed the final operational details. I've been ready my entire life, I replied, surprised by how true that felt. I just never knew it until now. The Montreal meeting with Elena Martinez exceeded every expectation we'd established. Sitting in the elegant hotel suite she'd booked, watching her methodically review my fabricated portfolio documents while her technical associate analyzed the honeypot pension system on his laptop, I experienced a profound shift in how I understood my own capabilities. Elena was nothing like I'd anticipated. Where Crystal projected predatory sexuality and obvious manipulation, Elena possessed the quiet authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect through competence, rather than charm. She was perhaps 50 years old, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested wealth without ostentation, and she spoke with the measured precision of someone who had never needed to raise her voice to be heard. Your investment strategies are impressive, she said, closing the final binder of fake financial records, particularly the offshore structuring through the Cayman subsidiaries. Most people attempting to hide assets make elementary mistakes that expose them to regulatory scrutiny. Through my hidden recording device, I knew Aaron was capturing every word for analysis by federal financial crimes specialists. I learned early that patience and sophistication are more valuable than speed and aggression, I replied, channeling the persona we'd carefully constructed. My marriage taught me that appearing less capable than you actually are can be a powerful strategic advantage. Elena smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her. Yes, Crystal mentioned your husband's interesting misconceptions about your abilities. Men often see what their egos need them to see, rather than what's actually there. Her associate, a thin man with nervous energy who'd introduced himself only as Marcus, looked up from his laptop. The pension system access is legitimate. She's got administrative privileges for 3 major funds totaling approximately $800 million in assets. The honeypot was working perfectly. Marcus had no idea he was analyzing a sophisticated simulation rather than real pension fund data. However, Elena continued, studying me with calculating eyes, before we discuss partnership possibilities, I need to understand your motivation. Why would someone with your resources and apparent domestic stability choose to enter our world? This was the crucial moment, the psychological test that would determine whether Elena believed my transformation from housewife to criminal partner was authentic. Because domestic stability was an illusion, I replied, allowing controlled anger to enter my voice. For 7 years, I built wealth in secret while pretending to be financially dependent on a man who ultimately betrayed me with a woman young enough to be his daughter. I played a role that diminished me while he accumulated debt in my name and planned to abandon me to financial ruin. I leaned forward, meeting Elena's gaze directly. I spent years hiding my capabilities to protect his ego. Now I want to use those capabilities for my own benefit, without apology or limitation. Elena nodded slowly. And the collateral damage, the pension fund beneficiaries who will lose their retirement security. Should I care more about strangers' retirement plans than my husband cared about our marriage vows? I asked. Besides, we're not destroying wealth, we're redistributing it to people intelligent enough to take advantage of opportunities. The callousness in my voice was completely fabricated, but Elena seemed convinced by the bitter logic. There's wisdom in that perspective, she said finally. Most people are limited by emotional attachments to conventional morality. Success requires the ability to see beyond such constraints. Marcus closed his laptop and nodded to Elena. The technical capabilities check out. If she can provide the access she's demonstrated, we could execute the pension fund operation within 2 weeks. Elena stood and walked to the suite's floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at Montreal's skyline. Very well. I'm prepared to offer you a partnership position in our organization. Your portfolio provides the operational funding we need for expansion, and your pension system access enables immediate revenue generation. Through my earpiece, Sabrina's voice was barely audible. Perfect. Keep her talking about operational details. What would partnership look like practically? I asked. Initially, you'd coordinate the pension fund attacks from your current location, while we establish your financial contributions through our Swiss infrastructure. Once the operations prove successful, you'd relocate to join our international team permanently. Elena outlined a criminal enterprise that spanned multiple continents, with specialized teams handling romance fraud, investment scams, cryptocurrency manipulation, and large-scale pension theft. My role would be coordinating North American operations, while contributing both funding and access to financial systems. The compensation structure is performance-based, she continued. Partners receive percentage shares of successful operations, rather than fixed salaries. Based on your capabilities and the scale of what you're enabling, you could expect annual returns in the tens of millions. As Elena described the scope of wealth I could accumulate through criminal activities, I realized I felt nothing, no temptation, no moral conflict, just clinical interest in documenting everything for federal prosecutors. The woman who had once hidden her legitimate wealth to preserve her husband's ego was gone. In her place sat someone who understood power, strategy, and the precise difference between appearing weak and actually being vulnerable. "I'm very interested," I said finally. "When do we begin?" Elena smiled. "Immediately. Marcus will coordinate the technical requirements for the pension fund access, and I'll arrange transfer protocols for your initial financial contributions." As we shook hands to formalize our criminal partnership, I knew I was crossing a line that would change everything, not into criminality, but into a version of myself that would never again allow anyone to underestimate what I was capable of achieving. The 48 hours following my Montreal meeting with Elena became a carefully choreographed dance between law enforcement preparation and criminal expectation. Elena's organization moved with impressive efficiency, sending detailed technical requirements for the pension fund access and wire transfer instructions for my supposed $5 million initial investment contribution. What they didn't know was that every communication was being intercepted and analyzed by a joint task force that now included FBI financial crimes specialists, international law enforcement coordinators, and cybersecurity experts from 3 federal agencies. "The beautiful thing about criminals who think they're smarter than everyone else," Aaron explained as he monitored Elena's digital communications in real time, "is that their overconfidence makes them careless about operational security." The technical requirements Elena's team had sent revealed far more about their methods than they realized. The specific software access they requested, the transaction protocols they outlined, and the international banking routes they preferred, created a digital map of their entire criminal infrastructure. But Elena had also demanded a test of my commitment that pushed our operation to its limits. "She wants you to execute a small-scale demonstration theft," Sabrina said, her expression grim as she reviewed Elena's latest message. "She's asking you to steal $100,000 from Margaret Chen's pension fund system as proof that you're serious about the partnership." The demand created an impossible situation. Actually stealing money would make me complicit in the crimes we were trying to prevent, but refusing would expose me as an undercover operative, and potentially trigger Elena's escape before we could arrest her. However, Norman added with a slight smile, "Elena doesn't know that we've been working with Margaret Chen for the past week." They had briefed Margaret on the investigation after our coffee meeting, and she had volunteered to help create an elaborate deception. The pension fund system Elena's organization thought they were targeting was actually an isolated simulation loaded with fake data and designed to capture detailed information about their attack methods. Margaret will execute a legitimate internal transfer that will appear to Elena's monitoring systems as if you've stolen $100,000, Aaron explained. The money will actually move between 2 accounts within the same pension fund, causing no harm to beneficiaries, but creating the electronic signature Elena's people are looking for. The plan was elegant, but it required precise timing. Elena had scheduled the demonstration theft for Friday afternoon, with the expectation that I would transfer the stolen funds to an offshore account she controlled by Monday morning. That gives us a 72-hour window to trace the money movement back to Elena's complete financial network, Sabrina said. "Once we understand how her organization processes stolen funds, we can freeze assets across multiple jurisdictions simultaneously." Thursday evening, as I prepared for what would likely be the final phase of the operation, my phone rang with a call that changed everything. "Haley, it's Derek." My husband's voice carried a desperation I'd never heard before, even through the careful control he was trying to maintain. "I need to warn you about something," he continued before I could respond. Crystal isn't who you think she is. She's involved with dangerous people, and I think they're planning to use information about you to commit serious crimes. The irony was staggering. After months of betrayal and criminal conspiracy, Derek was apparently having second thoughts about the woman he'd abandoned me for. "What makes you think that?" I asked, signaling to Aaron to start recording. "I've been overhearing conversations between Crystal and someone called Elena. They're planning to steal money from pension funds, and they keep talking about using your friend Margaret as an access point." His voice broke slightly. "Haley, I think I've been manipulated into helping them plan financial crimes that could hurt innocent people." Through my earpiece, Sabrina whispered urgent instructions. "Keep him talking. Find out how much he knows about Elena's broader organization." "Derek, where are you right now?" I asked. "Switzerland, but not in Monaco like I told you. We're in a compound outside Zurich with several other people who seem to be running similar operations in different countries. I think Crystal brought me here to provide legitimacy for a major financial crime, not to start a consulting business." The compound location was intelligence gold. Elena's organization apparently operated from a centralized facility that housed multiple criminal teams. "Listen to me carefully," I said, making a decision that surprised even me. "You need to get out of there immediately. These people are more dangerous than you realize, and law enforcement is closing in on their operations." "Law enforcement? How do you—" Derek stopped, and I could hear the pieces clicking together in his mind. "Haley, what have you been doing?" "What I should have done years ago, protecting myself and other innocent people from criminals like Crystal and Elena." There was a long pause before Derek spoke again, his voice hollow. "I've destroyed everything, haven't I? Our marriage, my business, probably my freedom. And for what? A woman who was using me to steal from the same people I spent years helping." "Yes, you have," I replied with surprising gentleness. "But if you help law enforcement now, you might be able to prevent worse damage to others." Within hours, Derek had been extracted from Switzerland by international law enforcement, and was providing detailed intelligence about Elena's compound, her organizational structure, and the scope of crimes being planned. The final test wasn't my willingness to steal money, it was whether I could transform my husband's betrayal into the key that would lock Elena's organization away forever. The coordinated takedown of Elena's criminal organization happened with surgical precision at 6 a.m. Eastern Time on a cold Tuesday morning. As I sat in Pinnacle's command center, watching multiple screens display simultaneous arrests across 4 countries, I felt a profound sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. "Teams are in position at the Switzerland compound." Agent Coleman's voice crackled through the communications system. "We have Elena Martinez in custody along with 7 associates. Crystal Rossi was arrested at the Zurich airport, attempting to board a flight to Singapore." Aaron pulled up financial tracking data, showing the real-time freezing of assets across 17 different accounts. "We've secured approximately $47 million in stolen funds across the network. The pension systems are completely protected, and we're beginning recovery proceedings for all identified victims." Derek's intelligence had proved invaluable. His detailed knowledge of Elena's organizational structure, combined with the evidence I'd gathered during my undercover work, had enabled law enforcement to map the entire criminal network with unprecedented accuracy. More importantly, Sabrina added, monitoring news feeds from multiple countries, we've prevented the coordinated pension fund attacks that would have affected over 60,000 retirees. The estimated prevented losses exceed $200 million. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Norman received confirmation that Margaret Chen's actual pension fund systems had been secured and upgraded with new protections based on intelligence gathered during our operation. Margaret wanted me to pass along her thanks, Norman said with a slight smile. She said that helping expose this threat was the most important work she's ever done, and that the security improvements we've implemented will protect retirement funds for years to come. As the immediate operational excitement subsided, attention turned to the complex legal proceedings that would determine everyone's fate. Derek's cooperation had earned him a plea agreement that would result in probation and restitution rather than prison time, but it also meant testifying against Elena's organization in multiple jurisdictions. He'll lose his financial advisor license permanently, Ezra Morrison explained during a briefing about the legal outcomes, and he'll be required to pay full restitution to the clients whose money he embezzled. But given the scale of what he helped prevent, prosecutors were willing to structure a deal that allows him to rebuild his life legitimately. Crystal faced far more serious consequences. Her pattern of romance fraud, money laundering, and attempted pension theft across multiple states had resulted in federal charges that could lead to decades in prison. She's already trying to negotiate a cooperation agreement, Morrison continued. But given Elena's arrest, she doesn't have much left to trade. She'll likely serve significant time. Elena herself faced the most serious charges of all. As the mastermind of an international criminal organization responsible for over $50 million in theft, she was looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole. The evidence you gathered, Sabrina told me, was crucial for the prosecution. The recordings of Elena describing her methods, the documentation of her organizational structure, and the intelligence about planned attacks created an airtight case. But the legal resolution was only part of my transformation. The skills I'd discovered during this crisis, strategic thinking, risk assessment, psychological analysis, and operational planning, had revealed capabilities I'd never known I possessed. We'd like to offer you a position, Sabrina said during our final debriefing. The Financial Crimes Unit needs investigators who understand both legitimate wealth management and criminal financial networks. Your combination of investment expertise and undercover experience is exactly what we need. The offer was tempting, but I'd already decided on a different path. My experience with Elena's organization had shown me how many people were vulnerable to financial manipulation and fraud. I wanted to use my skills to protect potential victims, rather than just prosecute criminals after the damage was done. I'm going to start a consulting firm, I explained. Financial security analysis for individuals and organizations, help people recognize and defend against the kinds of psychological and economic manipulation that Elena's organization specialized in. Aaron looked up from his computer with interest. That's actually brilliant. Most people have no idea how sophisticated these criminal operations have become. Education and prevention could be more effective than prosecution alone. Within 6 months, Calder Financial Security had become one of the most sought-after consulting firms in the region. My client list included pension fund administrators, wealthy individuals concerned about romance fraud, and corporations seeking to protect their executives from financial manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on me that my secret wealth, originally hidden to protect my husband's ego, had become the foundation for a business dedicated to helping others protect their financial security through transparency and education. But perhaps the most profound change was personal. The woman who had once hidden her capabilities to preserve a marriage built on false premises had evolved into someone who used her strengths openly and without apology. When Derek called 6 months after his sentencing to apologize and ask if we might consider reconciliation, my response surprised even me. I forgive you, I said, meaning it completely. But the woman you betrayed no longer exists. I've built something better from what you left behind. The conversation was brief, cordial, and final. I had genuinely moved beyond anger into something more powerful, complete independence from needing his validation, approval, or presence in my life. That evening, reviewing my business plans in the home office where this journey had begun, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. I was no longer someone things happened to. I was someone who made things happen. 2 years after discovering Derek's betrayal, I stood before a packed auditorium at the National Financial Security Conference, delivering the keynote address that had been months in the making. The title of my presentation, From Hidden Assets to Visible Strength, Building Financial Independence Through Strategic Transparency, represented everything I'd learned about the difference between secrecy born from fear and privacy maintained through strength. Financial manipulation succeeds when victims are isolated, ashamed, and convinced they have no alternatives. I told the audience of financial advisors, law enforcement officials, and fraud prevention specialists. But the most powerful defense against economic abuse isn't just knowledge, it's the confidence to use that knowledge without apology. In the front row, Margaret Chen smiled and nodded. She'd become not just a friend but a business partner, helping me develop security protocols that had been adopted by pension fund systems across 12 states. Our collaboration had prevented an estimated $500 million in potential theft over the past 18 months. The woman who hid $12 million from her husband wasn't protecting her marriage. I continued, sharing the story that had become central to my consulting work. She was enabling a dynamic that made both partners vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation they eventually faced. The audience was riveted as I walked them through the psychological tactics Elena's organization had used, the warning signs that could help others recognize similar threats, and the strategic responses that had turned a personal crisis into a tool for protecting thousands of innocent people. After my presentation, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "My fiancé has been pressuring me to combine our finances and let him manage our investments," she said. "After hearing your story, I realize he's been using some of the same manipulation tactics you described. Thank you for helping me see the difference between partnership and control." These conversations had become the most meaningful part of my work. Every person who recognized manipulation before it could destroy their financial security represented a victory that mattered more than any criminal prosecution. Back in my hotel room that evening, I reviewed the latest quarterly report from Calder Financial Security. The firm now employed 12 specialists and had consulted on cases involving over $200 million in protected assets. More importantly, our educational programs had reached over 50,000 people through workshops, online courses, and partnership programs with law enforcement agencies. My phone chimed with a message from Sabrina Reese, who had become both a professional colleague and genuine friend. "Saw your conference livestream. Elena's parole hearing was denied again today. She'll serve at least another 15 years before her next review. Your testimony about the pension fund plot continues to be cited as evidence of ongoing public danger." Elena's conviction had resulted in a life sentence, with the possibility of parole only after 25 years. Crystal had received 18 years and would serve at least 12 before becoming eligible for release. Both women had become case studies in federal law enforcement training programs, their methods analyzed and their psychological tactics documented to help investigators recognize similar operations. Derek had completed his probation successfully and was working as a financial literacy educator at a community college, using his experience to help others recognize and avoid the mistakes he'd made. We spoke occasionally, brief, cordial conversations that confirmed we'd both moved into completely different lives. As I prepared for bed in the hotel room, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and recognized something that still surprised me sometimes: complete contentment with who I'd become. The woman looking back had built a life based on authentic strength rather than hidden capabilities, professional relationships based on mutual respect rather than manufactured dependence, and financial security rooted in transparent competence rather than secret accumulation. The journey from betrayed wife to financial security expert had taught me that the most profound transformations aren't about becoming someone new. They're about finally becoming who you were always meant to be, without compromise or apology. That night I slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to use my story, my skills, and my strength to help others build the kind of unshakable security that no betrayal could ever destroy. The woman Derek had left with his debts was gone forever. In her place stood someone who had turned his betrayal into her greatest strength.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.